Savage Dragon 89 from July of 2001. Panic in Detroit. We've got a couple of guest stars in this issue, the Deadly Duo, as well as Neutron Bob. And this is a fun one, so let's get into it. Where to start? How about Josh Eckhorn down here, who can play guitar just like John Wayne, though I'm pretty sure the Duke couldn't sing or play guitar to save his life. Other credits, of course, Eric Larson, writer and artist, Chris Eliopoulos, letterer, Ruben Rude, and Abel Motown, colors. So, last we left off, issue 88. Dragon had been kicked out of Godtown after a fight with Thor, and they teleported his ass right out of there, sending him, apparently, to Detroit. Larson is channeling his inner Stan Lee in this issue, filling it in with some wise-cracking captions. Okay, so now you're all caught up to speed, so let's get on with it. Dragon wakes up in an alleyway. His foot is healed after getting blown off last issue, and he's got some company. This cartoony-looking hobo here who fills him in on his location, which surprises Dragon, because in his old world, Detroit was obliterated during the Martian invasion, just leaving a gigantic smoking crater. But that's not the case here. Everything actually seems to be fairly normal, and it appears that the Savage world is a little more civilized than we were originally led to believe. You know, it seemed like there were just mutants and monsters on every corner back in issue 76. But here, got an elderly mother in a modest apartment, sending her son out to asking him if he's going to miss supper. And if anybody tells you that this comic is packed solid with nonstop fights, set him straight, will you? Says the caption down there. Quick cut to a spacious mansion, the home of the Deadly Duo, Killcat and the Kid Avenger. They are out of costume at the moment, especially Kid Avenger, who's been caught in his birthday suit after hooking up with the executive secretary. And these roommates are just great comedic relief. Killcat is just a perfect buffoon, just the right mix of bluster, insecurity, incompetence, and overconfidence. So anyway, these jokers have their breakfast interrupted by an alarm, alerting them that a villain is on the loose. That's Neutron Bob. Now, this dude first appeared in one of the Deadly Duo miniseries, but he's never been really a prominently featured character in Savage Dragon, more of a background player. But he's got an interesting look, and he's a Detroit guy, so Larson pulled him out of the rogues gallery for this issue. And Neutron Bob is attacking police and robbing a bank. So that's right, there's banks in the Savage world and police. Anyway, Dragon is about to intervene when he's beaten to the punch by the Deadly Duo, though Bob mistakes Killcat for Sergeant Marvel. So I guess it's the ears. And it appears that Neutron Bob is too much for the two bumbling heroes. He blasts the Kid Avenger and then tosses his partner like a fastball special, just throwing him right at him. And Kid Avenger dodges him and is like, haha, you missed me, which is hilarious because Killcat has to tell him, you idiot, I can't fly, before he crashes off panel there. I can't repeat every joke here, but the humor is one of the highlights of this book. And it's easy to see why the Deadly Duo are fan favorites. These guys are just kind of great comedy foils for the Dragon. Speaking of our man, he's seen enough, and he decides to save these two goofballs from getting killed, so he lays out Neutron Bob with a right hook. And then during the fight, Bob says that Dragon and he are on the same team, which gets him a couple of boots to the face. And then Neutron Bob continues to plead his case, saying that he wants to overthrow Cyberface, the dictator of the world. And this seems to interest the Dragon. And of course, the Deadly Duo have impeccable timing, and they attack Bob before he can say any more. But Dragon has heard enough. Once he finds out that the Deadly Duo are essentially, working to maintain the status quo with Cyberface on top, Dragon tosses them like a couple of kids, one in each hand, and then him and Bob clean house, taking out the Deadly Duo. Now our new allies take off in a getaway car this sweet-looking purple hot rod with blue flames. Neutron Bob is a dope ride there. But of course, Larson hates to draw cars, so he blows it up on the next page there. It's a good way to make sure you don't have to draw that ever again. And they destroy the car. Apparently, the Deadly Duo have destroyed the car with some missiles from their fighter jet. Hot damn, who knew that these guys have a jet? But it's an eye for an eye. And Dragon is pissed, so he leaps into the air and demolishes their vehicle with a single punch. This may be one of the most unbelievable feats of strength that Dragon has ever shown off in these pages, once you start to think about the physics of such an action. So he grabs these two dickheads right out of midair, clonks their noggins together like a Three Stooges bit, and then safely lands while carrying these dudes. Pretty nutty. So Neutron Bob recovers, and our unlikely pair stroll off into the sunset, heading for Chicago, leaving the Deadly Duo tied up and naked. A hell of a 180-degree turn for our hero. Now he's beating up the good guys, teaming up with a villain, and heading to Chicago to try and recruit the Vicious Circle in his efforts to overthrow Cyberface. On to the letters page. Fanatics. Larson has just a laundry list of things he goes over here. First is a bit of background on the history of the Deadly Duo. Like many of the characters in this book, they were actually created decades previously for Larson's childhood comics. He created the Kid Avenger, and his pal, Aaron Katz, created Killcat. I'm just kind of realizing the feline connection there with his buddy's name. Anyway, Larson says that he redesigned the character for modern comics and that he made him a lot goofier in his personality than he originally was. He was more of like an effective crime fighter and ladies' man, but Larson has no regrets with the changes that he's made. And he encourages people to pick up the Deadly Duo miniseries if they enjoyed their antics here. Then Larson breaks the news that we've seen the last of Desperate Times. The comic strip appears in the back of these pages. Chris Eliopoulos has decided to wrap up the series in the previous issue. So this strip ran for 40 issues, and I always considered it like the peak Savage Dragon backup comic. So it's truly the end of an era here, though Eliopoulos will be sticking around as letterer for now. And Larson mentions there's a new strip called Wacky Snacks, which we'll get to that shortly. Then Larson announces that he'll no longer be working at Marvel on his projects that he's been doing. The world's greatest comic magazine is wrapping up with the 12th issue, and the Defenders will continue, but Larson will no longer be involved. He says he can't do everything he wants to do on all these projects at the level he wants to do them, so he's kind of cutting his workload back. And he has kind words for his collaborators, specifically Kurt Busiek, but the book didn't really turn out the way that he had envisioned, maybe because he and Kurt didn't mesh as well as they had hoped. They both have their own way of doing things, and sometimes those differences would clash, and the resulting comic would suffer, in Larson's opinion. My take is that Larson has gotten very comfortable with 100% creative control, and ceding that control is ultimately too frustrating. So now our guy can focus on Savage Dragon, which is great. Got plenty of letters here. In fact, too many letters. Two of the longest letters and their lengthy replies from Larson get reprinted twice. So this letter by Sean McGovern runs all the way through here. And then another one by Wilfred Noth here gets another lengthy response. And then both of these exchanges, which take up an entire page, are reprinted again over here and continuing here. So pretty big screw up, and readers are getting a serious case of deja vu here. But I will bring up one detail from this letter here. Sean McGovern says that the staff of his local comic shop will talk shit about Larson and Savage Dragon whenever he brings the comic up to purchase. And Larson calls these guys idiots who are killing the comic industry. And he's got a good point. It's a terrible business strategy. Why would the staff do this? Can you imagine going to a grocery store where the owner would come out and harass customers who buy cantaloupes? Like, I hate cantaloupes. I can't believe you're purchasing cantaloupes from my store. They're awful. And I still see this behavior in comic shops today. My local shop owner actually never misses an opportunity to mention how he can't stand Robert Kirkman books. And it just goes beyond stating his opinion. You know, like when you try and shame and dissuade customers from purchasing a comic that you sell in your comic shop, it's just insanity. So moving on. Moving on to the super dope Neutron Bob pinup by colorist Ruben Rude. I love this one. Just some really evocative imagery. Then we got the replacement for Desperate Times, Wacky Snacks. But the title here is Mighty Man and Tapai or Not Tapai. So this is a spoof of the old advertisements that you'd see in Marvel Comics back in the day for Hostess snack cakes. Heroes would take out villains, usually by tempting them with delicious fruit-filled pies. In this case, Mighty Man lets the criminals get away because he wanted to eat the pies for himself. Pretty funny stuff by Nick Darrington and Brian Blake. I enjoyed it, but I wonder if this gag may get old quickly. We still have Dragonbert by Carl H. as the final strip in these back pages. We've got a cameo by Big Bird from Sesame Street, Possibly Pregnant by Powerhouse. All right. That will wrap this one up. We've got a preview of the next 4 covers, including the return of Super Patriot down there. That's exciting. Next issue, issue 90. We'll find out whose grave this is. Adios.